That's a good perspective. I mean, but tell me something. When I see, and I break this down into three parts. Startups, when I look at them at any stage, and when we talk about them as investors or as facilitators or even startups or entrepreneurs ourselves, I tend to put them in three categories. One, it's a startup that's already launched, it's already doing very well, it's in business, it's pivoting, it's changing its course, it's improving. So it's on its flight. Then there are startups who've just taken off. They've just started, they're figuring out what would work, what won't work. And then there's a startup that's still on paper. It's still the idea stage startup, so trying to figure out what the market would be and all that. The three kind of startups the type of startups that could exist at any stage. At this point in time, would investors be interested in taking risks with startups that are idea stage or not?
I think the reality is for most investors, no. Because the reality is that there is so much uncertainty in a startup, internal, and now with so much uncertainty around the globe, a lot of investors, if they're not forced to make a move, may well say, why don't you come back in 3 to 6 months when things are a little bit more stable, and why don't we see then whether we should get going. There are, of course, some investors who are very aggressive in these kind of times, so deals definitely still do happen. It is not that nothing ever would happen, but out of 10 investors who would be investing 6 months ago, probably 2 or 3 would now be left and really be writing checks, even though probably 7 or 8 would still be looking in general.
So that brings me to the next question. What domains, what space in which startups operate usually, what do you think are the next hotcake startups that you'll expect to launch or to grow in the next 6 months to a year? Are there any particular areas you think would do better than others? Considering it's a no-brainer, companies doing edtech and online platforms and digital platforms for promoting education and stuff, I think that would clearly be a space that would prosper. But apart from that, do you see other areas growing as well? If there are entrepreneurs who will get to see this video, they may get some ideas, they may get some validations.
I think we need to be realistic around how long it takes to build a startup. So in the most successful of cases, you are easily in for a 5 to 8 year journey. And so therefore, if your market opportunity is only a year or 2, it actually doesn't really matter, because you will need the first 1-2 years just to set basic things up and to get started. Now, having said that, it is, of course, now the time to think about what are fundamental needs. And if we speak about education, for example, education is not a business that all of a sudden popped up today and for the next 6 months people will be trying to figure out how to do online education. No, education has been around forever, and education that people need, knowledge and training and teaching, is going to continue forever. The question is, how do they consume these services? What used to be maybe in schools and physical could now be done online, or it could be done remote, or it could be done blended. So I think my advice would be for anybody looking at models, be very careful around what is the timeless aspect of your model, and make sure that you're building a company which is capitalizing on a fundamental market opportunity. But don't just try and rush into something that is going to disappear in 6 months from now. An example would be hand sanitizers. So hand sanitizers is a business which has been around for a very long time, but there has been a shortage now, as we all know, for a couple of months. But it is entirely obvious that you're not going to have a hand sanitizer to fight Corona business that is going to be around for 10 years. But in online education business, that during these times is actually able to get some initial interest and double down and keep building that, because people do want to have education. And if you can deliver high quality education cheaper through online means, then it is something that is timeless, and that I absolutely think is a business that you should be looking at starting. Right. And it may be easier now, but it actually already was a good business idea 6 months ago as well, as long as you think in these 5 to 8 year time horizons.
Right. And that's a very good point. 5 to 8 years is what you're looking at. Great. I should particularly ask you of a company that you're so closely associated with, and you've been a major enabler in it, and it's been now a thing, and every second person is aware of the brand that exists by the name of Bykea, and the kind of service they provide, the vision that Munib carried has really grown with the help of people like yourself. I won't ask this question, how's Bykea doing, but I would ask this question considering a lockdown and considering pretty much similar pattern of operations in Pakistan as opposed to similar to other countries as well. The work, the load, the capacity to deliver, of course, everything's reduced because everything's shrunk. How are logistic companies that are managing transportation, or similar companies with similar models, how do you think they're dealing with this? And do they see an opportunity in this time, or is it just going to be losses that they'll have to absorb?
And I think it's obviously difficult times, and anybody who sugarcoats that is frankly not telling the truth. I mean, without diving deep into Bykea's numbers, but Kareem yesterday announced laying off more than 30% of the workforce, citing numbers of more than 80% drop in demand. And these are numbers that are very standard in the industry. So I think what people need to be aware of is that as much as we can talk about logistics and food delivery and these kind of sectors growing, but in terms of magnitudes, it is nowhere near what companies like Bykea or Kareem lost in the transport business. Right. So short term, it's obviously very, very tough times, and we see that around the world. But I think this is also where different companies really need to go into their own soul searching and need to look at how are they set up. So one of the things with Bykea that always was unusual about us, and that was one of the things that made me very excited, is a strong focus actually on unit economics and on not burning a lot of money. And we were actually, even before this lockdown, at a point where our network was operationally near break even. This means that we weren't burning a lot of money, whereas most players globally were burning a lot of money. Now, when the lockdown came and when we had to decide what do we do, you have a couple of options. Obviously, we didn't have any revenue, so a lot of the numbers came crashing down. We could start and lay off a lot of people. And some companies went down that path. But for us, we actually thought a little bit more deeply about this, and so for us the decision was that what Bykea really does is Bykea is a network that transports people on motorbikes cheaply, conveniently, quickly. It transports goods on motorbikes, but it could also be on small trucks or rickshaws or other vehicles. It is literally a network which makes the world smaller by connecting goods, parcels, and cash in the physical world. And the reality is that isn't going to change the need for that. Now, how this is going to happen is definitely going to always evolve and change, but the fundamental need isn't going to change. And so therefore, at least for Bykea, our decision has been that when this blows over, as it definitely will, there will be some form of new normal where people will still have to move and want to move and need to move in a cheap, affordable, fast way. They will still want deliveries. They will want food. Cash will continue to exist. So what we're trying to optimize for is the things that are constants throughout the times, and just change the ways how we deliver upon them, and make sure that we don't kill the business now by laying off people, making a recovery slower. But actually, Bykea, even in these days, we are actually hiring very carefully, but for selected positions, we're even hiring because we're preparing for the upswing to make sure that we can grow faster than anybody else at that point in time.
That's interesting. That's interesting because this is the time when very few people may think of gearing up for the next phase, which will be a phase when the demands will go boomingly high. I mean, they'll sprout up from all parts of the country. So this is a great way to think. And you talked about soul searching, very interesting. That brings me to that point where I always like asking this question. Will CEOs be tested in Pakistan? You know the Pakistan market really well. You work with other developing markets also. Will CEOs be tested in this time, or is it simple no-brainer decisions that, okay, let's get rid of 10%, 20% of people, let's reduce operation or OPEX, blah, blah, blah. Is it that simple? Or does this really require going back to your vision that made you start this company as a CEO, as a founder? And that's where soul searching comes in. Why am I in this business? How do you think they'll be tested? On what parameters would they be tested? And how do you think most, not just in Pakistan, globally as well, the big companies, how do you think most CEOs would fare in this period?
I think it's a really interesting question, because one of the most fun parts about my kind of job is that I get to talk with a lot of different companies and teams, and I can see how they react. And even keeping your eyes open and seeing how some of the other companies around the world react, I think is very revealing, because these are times where everybody is under extreme pressure. And these are times where you really need to make hard decisions where there's very rarely a clear right or wrong. So there is a case to be made. If you look at a lot of the US VCs, they all are pushing people or pushing portfolio companies to cut costs as quickly and aggressively as possible and lay off as many people as possible, because survive. And any dollar saved is a dollar which may be extended runway. However, this is also a certain culture that you therefore are putting in place, where the moment things get tough, you are saying people need to go first. And that is a certain type of culture which makes it very difficult in the good times to build the trust that you'll still be around in the bad times. I think emerging market CEOs actually have a certain advantage, because people who operate in emerging markets are used to some form of drama all the time. And if I just, it's not a business example per se, but if I just look at my own Pakistan experiences, almost every year there has been some event where, for one reason or another, I got stuck in Pakistan because I couldn't travel. One year it was the fog in Lahore. The next year it was this unfortunate spat with India. But there's always constantly stuff which is kind of happening, which means that people need to be on their edge, but they're used to be on their edge. And this is, in times like this, also a huge advantage. So yes, these are absolutely times where you need to go back to your, what is it that you actually are trying to do? And for some people, that even means building the most efficient organization, the leanest, with the least headcount and all of that. But for other many companies, it is about what is actually the core vision in terms of what you're building. And sticking with the Bykea example again, this is a case where it's simply about how do you provide this online to offline network that moves people, goods, and money around.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I was thinking the other day, about your stories, and because I know you for a while, so I thought I'd ask this question. I mean, there's so many better, bigger markets across the world where you can just hop in as an investor. I'm talking about you, or someone who sees opportunity to even set up businesses or be a director in companies and stuff like that. Um, but uh, how come you always choose developing markets? How come you always choose Vietnam and Pakistan? And I know there's opportunity for sure. I mean, we believe in this market ourselves. That's why we're here. But as someone who's an outsider, how do you see such markets as lucrative? Because this would help a lot of entrepreneurs understand that we're sitting on opportunity that a lot of us don't see. So as someone who's taking this bird's eye view of different markets and focusing himself and his energy and his time and his money on developing markets, is there a particular reason for this?
I think there's a very simple reason that the great thing about developing markets is, as the name says, they are developing versus developed markets, where again, actually the label already gives it away, they're finished. So of course there is opportunity around the world in any place, but the magnitude of opportunity and how hard you need to fight and how much opportunity there is, I think there are just magnitudes of difference between markets. So if we look at a place like Pakistan, what excites me is there simply are, across so many different domains, there are big companies to be built. And it is not even that one needs to be a genius applying the most advanced research. In many cases, in developing markets, you look at good models and you execute them very well without messing up. And that actually is already enough. So from a risk perspective, actually emerging markets can be even less risky than if you try and do venture in Silicon Valley or in Europe, where in reality, the only way to differentiate is by being so advanced that the risk of technological failure is actually very high because that's the only thing left.
Yeah. Agreed. Very good. So there's this one question that I had pertaining to something that I'm up to these days. I've been sharing this with some of my friends, even you. I plan to now venture into the training and consultancy space. Been working on this for a while. I think there's a lot of juice. Do you think such businesses of all types, businesses with large workforce, businesses who have large size customer service teams or operation teams, whether SMEs or startups or even larger companies, do you think the business of consultancy and training could bloom in 6 to 10 months or a year and the coming time period, or would it take a hit as well?
So I think one of the advantages that you would have as a smaller player is that while the industry may overall shrink, it actually doesn't matter that much as long as there is enough room for you to grow. And I think this is especially what I always come back to, a question of what is the differentiation and what is the core value that is being provided. So if we talk about consulting and training, these are timeless needs. Whatever the world is going through, there is always a need for people to support, to help train the workforce. There is always a need for accessing expertise. Now, the question is relevance and making sure that the training and the expertise provided is relevant with what companies are facing right now. But I think this is something where one needs to look very, very carefully. But blanket statements that training or consulting is going to die or be non-existent, I don't think they are warranted. Are the big McKinseys and BCGs of this world going to sign the mega deals in the next month? No, but that's fine, because if they're looking at a $10 million or a $50 million contract, you're maybe looking at 5% of that, and there are many companies that can do that. There are only very few companies and organizations that can afford the McKinseys.
Yes, that's very true, and that's highly applicable in Pakistan for sure. After my market research for the past 6 months. This is interesting. I like what you just said there. About this next question is going to be mainly for founders, for startup founders, for those who are early in the business. They're startups because they're early in the business, right? So right now, if I were to ask you for an advice that you could give to a founder planning their operations, running them, operating online or maybe in person in physical settings, what are the key things that a founder should now be focusing on, in your opinion? What would attract you about that founder as an investor, that this person's thinking right? So at this time, for the next 6 months or a year, of course, everyone needs to wear their thinking hat. If you're not thinking right now, you're basically going to be finished in the next few months, or at least you'll at least see massive losses. So thinking hats need to be on for sure. Those who are thinking, are they thinking right or not? What would be your 2 cents on this?
I think the key, as you say, is thinking hats, but thinking hats also means here having a couple of different scenarios in your head and being able to explain how, as different scenarios may evolve, you are going to react. Because the reality is we all are heavily dependent on the outside world. And I think as startup founders, we tend to underestimate that. But if you look at it, even the biggest companies in the world, you look at the airline industry, an industry I spent 5 years in, that industry has evaporated even worse than the Bykea or Careem or Uber industry.
Yeah.
So, and these are the huge billion-dollar companies. Nobody could have imagined that, but I think what this shows us is that as we are thinking and planning for the future, we need to not only optimize for one path, but we need to look at 2, 3, 4 different scenarios and be very aware around decision points, which lead to us assessing, are we on path A or on path B or path C, and what does that mean and what does that look like for our business?
Right. Perfect. So I received some questions here. You are someone who has his skin in the game, especially in Pakistan. You've been associated with those who are making a positive contribution to Pakistan for a long time. You have built your association with our youth over the years, but with expectations comes disappointment. What have been your disappointments about our youth and our youngsters and our startups? Be politically correct.
No, that's an interesting, difficult question. I mean, I think so far my disappointments have been limited because I think fundamentally the startup game is a game that if you get disappointed very quickly, you're going to burn out very fast, because even the best founders, the best companies, the chances of failure are quite high. I do sometimes, I wouldn't say disappointment, but rather things where I believe that a lot of Pakistani founders can do better and would be well advised to double down upon, would be to take it a little bit slower sometimes and listen a little bit more carefully to a couple of different perspectives, and not just seek the positive confirmation. I do have sometimes people, especially very young founders, who come and ask me 10 questions, and I say 10 things which are 9 negative, 1 positive, and the 1 positive thing is all they take away because that's what they were hearing. But that's what they wanted to hear, instead of looking at both the good, the bad, and the ugly, and recognizing and realizing that actually the bad and the ugly is not things that you can ignore or should ignore, but they're actually opportunities and things to address. Because otherwise you are sooner or later going to run into trouble. But I mean, overall, I think Pakistan is, at least in my view and my comparison with a lot of other markets that I look at, it's at a very, very, very early stage, obviously, but it has a lot of the raw ingredients where the hope is that companies like, obviously Bykea, but there are others like Qadeer or in Airlift, or now with Zameen and the recent funding round, there was a genuinely homegrown billion-dollar valuation company out of Pakistan. So there are companies which hopefully are able to train the next generation and make sure that not just this very raw potential is there, but there are enough leaders who can have been through the game once and can keep building these startups to pull up the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because because the word mentorship has been misused a lot in Pakistan nowadays. Everyone intends to be a mentor, and a lot of young startups aspire to have mentors, whereas the best mentor is Google itself. I mean, you can search for anything that you want and you can get all the answers. So there has to be, questions need to make sense. Why do you even need a mentor? And what do you exactly want from them? And if I take it to the other side of the table, those who have established companies now, those like you mentioned Zameen, and you mentioned Kareem, and you mentioned Bykea, and the similar league of Airlifts, these companies now need to share their learnings, and not just learnings that are nice to share learnings, the learnings that are real pain points that they've had to endure, and then they've had to cope with, so that and they need to be the mentors now to these companies, even sometimes be investors to these companies. So be angel investors in these little companies, so that they can, because clearly, I mean, you can't get it right as an entrepreneur for the first time. You have to run through this series of failures to get to that one success that you can call a success. And yes, you're extremely correct. Patience is not our virtue. We aren't really good at patience, and we give up easily. We want overnight success. And as you so rightly quoted, that it takes about 5 to 7 years easily for people to build companies. I mean, it just won't happen overnight, and that's something that we don't understand. So I have Mohsen who's asked me this question. I'd like to share this with you. He's saying, how about introducing new options in current situation, like Uber engaged well with Al-Fatah for grocery delivery. Similarly, there are many companies, individuals who are looking for cheaper and faster options. Is Bykea going to introduce something new during COVID? That's the question.
So absolutely, and I need to be a little bit careful of what I announce here, because this is unofficial, but at the same time, because I'm far away from Munif, so I guess I'm safe. But no, absolutely the way we look at it again is, what are demands that are fundamental and that we can fulfill with Bykea? And now everybody is scrambling for, how can you get delivery sorted? How can you, even a lot of small businesses, restaurants, not even talking about food ordering per se, but just how do they get riders? You have shops who, during the lockdown, we saw it, shutters shut, but if you have the owner's WhatsApp, he will be very happy to try and sell you from light bulbs to whatever it is. So, and these kind of businesses, everybody is looking at how can you get this logistics network done.
Yeah.
And this is something that we absolutely are working very hard on, and already actually have the ability that any business is able to just call a Bykea. We used to do it based on trips, but now we're working on the provision even by the hour, that if you need a rider, you don't want to say here are 20 deliveries and call 20 Bykea trips. You just say you need a partner for 2 hours, 3 hours, book them by the hour. We have been working together, for example, with some charities around cash collection for donations. So if you are at home and you're trying to donate cash, you can call a Bykea and the cash is going to automatically be dispersed with partnering NGOs. So these are some of the different things. There is something around iftar boxes that we're working on, which again, both in COVID times, but also seasonally, obviously with Ramzan, is something that we are looking at very carefully.
Very nice, interesting. That's wonderful. Mohsin, just thank you for the answer that you gave. Thank you very much. My last question for you would be pertaining to us as a country. You've now, I mean, I know you do downright, you try and be humble around this and not share your extreme liking for Pakistan and Pakistanis, because I know you for many years. I take the blame of introducing you to this ecosystem many years ago when I was in my government role many years ago. So, and I've seen how you literally, I asked you for, I remember back in 2017, I asked you that a real test of someone from outside of Pakistan would be when they put their skin in the game, when they bring money in the game, when they start visiting more often. They're not just tourists. They give time, advice, and they put money. You did all of that. So you've proven to be a major ambassador of Pakistan and so many other countries also. And I thank you for that. As a country and as an economy, do you see us, considering we're moving towards a digital Pakistan now, that's something that we believe in, that's something that the government understands, which is very, very positive, something that was not happening some years ago. Where do you see us as an ecosystem, as an economy in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see us going? What's your quick take on that?
I mean, I think ultimately I am very optimistic as long as the time frame is long enough. And what that means is, we've seen it in Southeast Asia. Countries go through waves. There are good times, there are bad times, but over a long enough time period, if we talk again 5 or more like 10 years, they all come up. They all succeed as long as they focus on getting the basics right, which is making sure that there is a well-functioning economy, and especially when we speak about well-functioning economy, vibrant SMEs, startups, focus a lot on export, because that makes sure that you're globally competitive, that you're actually developing first through low cost, but then through higher expertise and value add. I think Pakistan has all of the raw ingredients. And one of my favorite statistics is, if I go around the globe and speak about India, everybody over the last 5-7 years has become very excited about India. And if I then talk about startups in India, everybody's like, yeah, that's an amazing opportunity, and billions of dollars are obviously being invested. But when I start comparing, and when I say, okay, you know, India, bit over 1 billion people, you know how many people Pakistan has, what the population is? Okay, 200 million. So we're talking about roughly a sixth. We're talking GDP per capita. That's the next shock for many. Per capita, it's maybe 30 whatever % less. But then the killer statistic for me is VC dollars. For 100 VC dollars that go into India, how many VC dollars go into Pakistan? And that's where we're talking about $1.67 on average. So we're talking about a sixth of the population, 20-30% less GDP per capita, but we're talking about $1.67 to $100 venture capital. And that's, of course, a very crude way of looking at it, but it is something which shows me that...
But that does give a picture. That does give a picture, yeah.
Exactly. Even if my hypothesis as an outsider is off by 50% of Pakistan's potential, there still is so much potential. But we need to be patient. We can't expect to see companies from nothing go to billion-dollar valuations in 2-3 years. It is going to take a long time. So we need to try and move as quickly as possible, but understand that this is a journey of 1,000 steps where we're maybe at step 3 or 4 now. And it doesn't help to start 1,000 new journeys of each one step. We need to make sure that we keep going down this path and take the next steps in order to build upon things.
Well, what you're saying is we need to keep moving. Journey is long, stay patient, stay focused, and keep at it. Keep the ball rolling. That's what you mean.
I think that's it. And I think it's very, interestingly, it's very similar to whether we're talking about startups or whether we're talking about ecosystems or, for that matter, probably even countries. As soon as you start doing things, it gets very easy to become distracted. New things pop up, the world changes, new opportunities arise, and starting things always is exciting, and people love that. But the problem is the payback doesn't come when you start them. The payback is when you finish them. And so if it is 5 to 10 years, this means you need to stick at something for 5 to 10 years in order to see that payback. And that's what we need to make sure that we don't forget. And that is one of my key advices also for founders always. If you're not willing to plant a flag for 5 to 8 years, and 5 is really the minimum, then you should be starting that business, because you're simply setting yourself up for failure.
Agreed. Persistence and focus, 2 things. Thank you very, very much, Jonas. Thank you very much for taking time out. This was a great conversation, and we'll be sharing it over other platforms. And if we get any more questions, we'll make sure the questions reach you, and then you can respond to them. Thank you very, very much. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you, Nabeel.